Thanks.
Good morning, Council. For the record, Ahmad Kaimi with Public Works. This morning, we'd like to go over a possibility of acquiring a property that's valuable for conservation futures and also for clean water. We were approached by the property owner. So this morning, we would like to talk to you about the alternatives that are available. And at the end, we would like to ask Council for direction in terms of any alternative or all the alternatives that we can do for public outreach. We like to go to the community and ask for their input, with either as one of the alternatives that the council selects or all the alternatives that we have. We're going to present that to you this morning. So, and feel free to stop us and ask any questions you might have. So I have on my team, Pat Lee and also Kevin Tyler, that will do the presentation. And then we, at the end, we'll take any questions or in between if you have any questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin and Pat to give the presentation about this property and the opportunities that we have with different alternatives. And then at the end, I would like to get your direction on which direction you'd like us to move forward for the public outreach, for all the alternatives, or just one of the single alternatives. So, Kevin?
Good morning, Council. Kevin Tyler, Parks and Lands Division. Pat Lee will be leading us through the presentation this morning, so I'll just let him take off. Go ahead, Pat.
Okay, thank you. This is Patrick Lee with the Parks and Lands Division, and we're here to talk to you about Cedars golf course property. Do I just advance the slides, Rebecca? Would that work? Oh, okay. All right. We were approached by the landowners, J&A Property Holdings, in 2019 about a possible sale of this property. And in 2020, we actually developed 5 different alternative acquisition possibilities for the property. And the acquisition of Cedars Golf Course was reviewed by the Parks Advisory Board in late 2020 and early 2021, and it was ranked as the second highest project among 15 projects considered by the Parks Advisory Board for acquisition. And while we need a fair market appraisal to move forward with any acquisition that council directs us to pursue, at least in 2019, informal asking price for the property by the landowners was $3.5 million. Next slide, please. This is sort of a project site location map with the site located in green. I don't know if you probably cannot see my cursor, can you? But anyway, there is some features. The property itself is about 133 acres in size. We are adjacent to the Chilachi Prairie Rail Trail corridor and also our existing Salmon Morgan Creeks area. The property is entirely within the city of Battleground, and this is a high priority acquisition for the city as well. Next slide, please. So what are the opportunities here? There's 2 miles of Salmon Creek that flow through the property. Golf carts could be adopted for trail use. There is a trailhead opportunity that could serve this property, the Chilachi Prairie Rail Trail corridor, and the Salmon Morgan Creeks corridor, which has some access interior to the neighborhood, but the site has become very popular in the last few years, and it'd be nice to move that traffic away from the interior neighborhood. It's a designated biodiversity corridor by Department of Fish and Wildlife, and there is a high opportunity for water quality and salmon restoration. And we have given you on the right side of the slide sort of the assessed land value per acre is $19,897 per acre. Recent sales indicate a higher price of 29 to 42,000 per acre. And based on that, you're looking at 3.5 to 5 million for 118 acres, which is alternative one. If you go to the next slide, Rebecca. And this was, at least in our initial discussions, staff's preferred alternative to pursue. It includes the 118 acres, really everything in green, except what's shown in the yellow-orange is kind of the immediate area surrounding the clubhouse. That's about 15 acres. And this includes water rights owned by the golf course, includes property immediately adjacent to the Chilachi Prairie Rail Trail Corridor, as well as a small maintenance building as you go to the southern sections of the property. And as I indicated, this is the cost range based on recent sales for 118 acres. Next slide, please. Alternative two, very similar to alternative one. We still wish to acquire the water rights, and this includes the maintenance area, the small maintenance area at the south of the property, but it excludes that area immediately adjacent to the railroad. This is 112 acres with a cost range of 3.3 to 4.7 based on recent sales. And possible uses of the maintenance area when we were reviewing this alternative and others was it might be a good maintenance area to take care of this property and some of the surrounding properties as well. Next slide, please. Alternative three, as you can see in the lightest yellow down at the south, that is the small maintenance area. This is 105 acres total. It does include water rights owned and the potential cost based on recent sales. I would say that when the Parks Advisory Board reviewed this project, they suggested the highest priority acquisitions would be that portion of the property along Salmon Creek, the main stem of Salmon Creek, which is that area shown in green on this slide. And recent communications with the landowner also indicates this is probably their preferred alternative at this time. Next slide, please. Alternative four is basically the same as alternative three, excludes water rights. Tough to get a handle on what the water rights are valued at, but some sources indicate they could be in the order of $7,000 per acre. So this would be probably the cheapest option. It'd be 105 acres like alternative three. And would include the land along the main stem of Salmon Creek as indicated by the Parks Advisory Board as a priority. Next slide, please. Alternative five is purchase of the entire site, including the clubhouse area, which is just above kind of that subdivision at the very south of the slide. And as I think there has been some discussions with council, we do not believe that purchase of the clubhouse would be an eligible expense for Conservation Futures Fund nor the Clean Water Fund. The Clean Water Stormwater Capital Plan sets aside $300,000 for purchase of this property as a non-structural stormwater control. And we also believe that purchasing the clubhouse would, to make it functional, would require major rehabilitation. So I think that concludes my review of the alternatives. Next slide, Rebecca. And yes, any questions council has?
I have if you would go back to option one and show the map again, please. So the green portion that goes through this map, not the identified portion, is that Salmon Creek? Is that the golf course? What is it?
The sort of diagonal from the northeast corner to the southwest corner, that would be the main stem of Salmon Creek. It flows through that area. And all of it is now currently part of the golf course operation. And there are, various holes located throughout the property. That's an 18-hole golf course, and with the clubhouse area and the areas shown in the orange.
Thank you. Are there other questions of the council?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Councilman.
Thank you. So I do have some questions about the railroad impact. And focusing on option one, I like the idea of creating a conservation buffer for the railroad. What I'm concerned about is if the railroad does become an economic driver for economic development, and that's going to include increased rail traffic. The one photo you had of the golf course trail coming right up to the railroad line, I think creates an enormous safety hazard. And so I'm concerned about a buffer, and I do prefer creating them, but we don't want to put a trail right immediately adjacent to trains that may be a real hazard to young children or people invited to walk along that trail. So if I could just have a response about what you intend on trails if we were to go with option one.
I would say one, we haven't, at this point, we're looking at the acquisition, we haven't thought out this specific design for that. Some techniques that could be used, we could provide some of the buffer next to the railroad track, as you said. I think there's probably, at least 50 feet wide in that section next to the railroad track. So there would be opportunity to build in some sort of buffer there. You could relocate that portion of the trail so it's follows on the other side of the buffer, conceivably. And then other options, of course, would be probably more challenging. I mean, you could certainly put up a fence to separate the railroad from the green space. But again, we haven't gotten to the details, but I think there are some options to address your question.
Okay, thank you. So it's for future discussion. So the other area I wanted to address, and I heard the recommendation of the Parks Advisory, and I was actually there during a couple of their sessions on it. And I think it's a valuable recommendation. Coupled with that, it's a high priority for the city. It's a high priority for the Lower Columbian Fish Recovery Board along Salmon Creek for salmonid recovery. This is a huge benefit to Battleground, and which is in my district, so certainly I'm in favor of it. When I was at the parks briefing on this, one of the other projects for conservation came up, and both of them struck me because they were both within city annexed areas. And right away I questioned, well, all right, well, it's good for the county to invest in annexed areas for conservation, but what is the partnership? This basically expands on the Salmon Creek area, and I'm wondering what goes on in there, if there are trails in that natural area. But what is the partnership with Battleground? What do they invest? Do they just get this additional green space with no contribution at all into this conservation effort. And whether or not you discuss that with Battleground as you're looking at these options. And the other part of that is I had hoped that the YMCA was going to piggyback off of this effort, knowing that we can't conserve or with the conservation funds by the clubhouse in that area. On the other hand, that would have been an ideal location for the YMCA. If they wanted to bite off on that, they could have developed it as part of just basically piggybacking off of our conservation effort. So was that discussion with YMCA and the owner ever addressed as kind of all the interested entities having some interest in this, from Battleground to the YMCA to the county? So Ahmad, did any of these discussion points come in? You know, I think it's somewhat unfair that Battleground gets all this green space with no contribution.
Thank you, Council, for the question. So I think you had two questions. One, the outreach with YMCA and also outreach with the City of Battleground and partnership. I did have some discussion with YMCA, and they like some areas nearby the Battleground. So this could be one of the locations that we're going to have a discussion with them. But we wanted to bring that to council so that we can start negotiating with the property owner and also direction to we can do the public outreach. And one of them will be involved with City of Battleground and see how much they like to participate, because I agree it does provide a value for the City of Battleground and also for us to protect the waterways. But this is our first step. That we want to make sure that the council feel comfortable with the alternatives that we provided, and then having the public outreach and having the discussion with City of Battleground as well.
Okay, thank you. And just to restate, what is going on in Salmon Morgan Creeks? I've never walked through it or hiked through it. What is public access to that area adjacent to what we're looking to conserve?
I can respond to that. There's two areas where access is taken currently. You see the Salmon Morgan Creek natural area, that title there. If you go down to that notch just below it, where that road comes in, so that is to the right of that there, right there. That is the 183rd loop. That's one access point. And then if you consider along the south property line of our property over to the right-hand side, over down south, over more to the east, to the east, to the right. There you go. Right. A little bit left of that, there is 161st Street. So it's basically on-street parking now. There is a trail system in Salmon Morgan Creek's natural area. It's a very beautiful area. It's got a mature mixed conifer forest. You have Morgan Creek that flows through it. So it's a very beautiful site. It's become very popular since we acquired it about 10 years ago.
Okay, thanks for that. And what is meant on this slide by the future Chilachi Trail? Because I keep hearing these rumors that Parks was working on converting the railroad bed to a trail. And so is that, what are we talking about here?
That is what the plan has been. Unless directed otherwise, we would look for opportunities to see if we can make that happen.
Yeah, I'll tell you, thanks for stating that publicly. Yeah, I'd like to put an all stop to that trail plan. We're trying to develop the railroad.
Absolutely. That is not the plan.
The Chilachi Trail Plan has been in place for years.
Who's speaking?
This is Councilor Olson.
Will you stop just a moment, please? I was speaking. We have, that may have been in place, but since I've been on the council since 2017, there has been major pushback on this. We want to develop the railroad. We do not want to pull it up and make a trail. And I've heard this over and over and over, and I agree. We want to develop the railroad. It's completely unsafe for there to be a trail near the railroad. So scratch that.
I don't know that that's actually accurate. I think there are plenty of examples throughout the state and country where there are existing short line rails or other rails where there are trails along the rail line. It doesn't have to be dangerous. They've done it in the past, and I think it's a common practice. So I don't think it has to be either or, that we would not do a trail because we're going to develop the railroad. So I'd like to kind of keep that conversation open because I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So that said, I do have a couple more questions, if I might, on this topic.
Go ahead.
So when we talk about the city of Battleground, Pat or Kevin or Ahmad, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't everybody in the county pay into the conservation futures levy?
Yes, it's a countywide levy. Both people within municipalities and those within the unincorporated area contribute to the conservation futures levy.
Okay, so the citizens of Battleground do contribute, so they would have some contribution to this particular project. And then I just want to get some clarification on this YMCA discussion. I mean, that doesn't seem to me like a discussion that we would be involved in. That seems like it'd be the property owner and the YMCA if we were to proceed with any one of these particular alternatives. Am I missing something there?
I would actually defer to Ahmad, who's had more direct conversation with the YMCA than I have personally.
Thank you, Council, for the question. So I think the one reason we wanted to have this discussion today with Council about providing different options, so we can do negotiation. One of the options, like number 5, does include the clubhouse. And if Council decides to pursue that option, they want to have the discussion, follow discussion with YMCA and see that if that building is something feasible for them. I have walked through the building. It's built a long time ago, and I know it needs a lot of upgrades to bring it to the current building codes and access and fire issues. That's something that they could probably evaluate. But I did have a conversation with YMCA about potential areas around the county or nearby I-5 or the fairground, but they like to find somewhere nearby Battleground area. So this would be one of the options, but I've not done a lot of discussion with them whether this building was feasible for them or not, but I wanted to have that conversation with Council in terms of alternatives first.
Okay, all right. And then I would certainly think as we consider some of these alternatives that we would want the water rights. I mean, I don't know that we would want to proceed if we didn't have the water rights. So I know that's part of one of your alternatives, but it seems to me that we would want to make sure we have the water rights.
That would be my recommendation because water rights are very difficult to obtain, especially if their water rights are senior and we could use it for future uses instead of using municipal water.
Right. Okay. And then one last question you'd mentioned, I think Pat mentioned in the presentation that as he was going through the alternatives that more currently that the owner was leaning more toward option or alternative 3. Is that?
Yes. They have indicated that probably the 105 acre acquisition would be the way they're leaning currently in terms of preferred alternative from their perspective.
Okay. Okay, and then just one last question, and maybe, Ahmad, you spoke with a little bit with the city of Battleground. In addition to just obviously having this asset in the city, did the city provide any other details as to why this was a high priority for them?
I haven't started the discussion with City Battleground, but that'll be one I think that we're going to talk to them. I don't know if Kevin, if you had any previous conversation or input from the City of Battleground.
This is Pat. I've had some conversations with the City of Battleground, and actually, the Jolmas that are the owners of the golf course had actually approached the City of Battleground first about possible sale of this, and the City of Battleground it really does not have much of an operating parks function at the present time. I think they may consider such a function in the future, but at the moment they don't really have much, and they didn't have the acquisition resources on their own to purchase the property. So when I spoke to them, they were very happy that we had conversations with the Jolmas and began to talk about possible acquisition of the property. Long term, if they develop a parks function, I think a serious discussion about turning management of the property over to them would make a lot of sense long term, and if they choose to move in that direction.
You finished, Councilor Olson? I think
Madam Chair.
yes. Hang on just 1 minute. I
Please.
have a couple comments here. First of all, we're being presented this work session. We've seen some of this before, but I hope that at the end of this, it isn't, you know, does the council want to go forward with beginning negotiations? This is ridiculous that we would even start negotiating anything until we know answers to the questions, many of the questions that have been posed. And I want to know, has the people who live around the Cedars golf course been included in any discussions? We don't start negotiating before we know whether the public wants this. Just because the owner wants to sell it and we have some counselors interested in buying it, apparently, that does not make way for negotiations to begin. We represent the public. The public needs to have input. There are so many unanswered questions that have been posed. It's almost unbelievable to me that we are at a point where we're talking about choosing an option to start negotiating before we've even talked to the people. So that's my comment. We are putting the cart way before the horse. And then the other question that I have is, you're saying that the owner prefers option 3. Why? Could you explain why? Has that owner voiced why they are interested in option 3?
Yes, they are looking at potential development of that portion and that portion, the portions adjacent to the railroad corridor and the portion around the maintenance area at the south of the property. So they are in the preliminary stages of looking at development of those areas.
Council, I just want to add one more thing. Chair, no, we would like to do the public outreach first. And I think one of the things we want to do is making sure that we present to you the alternatives that are available, so that if you would like for all the alternatives to be discussed and with the public and get some options and bring it back to you what the input is before we do negotiation, or if you like just one of the options get public input. So it's totally up to you what direction you'd like to give us, but we want to do public outreach. So that's our next step. And then do the findings and come back to you and get some more direction before we start do a full negotiation with the property owners.
Okay, Councilor Manbiji.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to clarify some of the discussion, particularly that went on with Councilor Olson. And let me just be clear. I am in favor of this conservation effort, however it ends up looking. And at this point, water rights and option 1 look like, to me, the best way to proceed. I absolutely agree with the chair that we really need to now start in earnest the public outreach. I've gotten a handful of emails from my constituents in that area, and obviously the general trend is, yeah, we want to conserve as much as we can. So that they like the golf course. I had constituents say, hey, buy the golf course and run it as a golf course. Now, I don't want to own another golf course, but as far as the county goes. In any case, I'm in favor of this. I enjoy these conversations. It's kind of the art of the deal. And Ahmad, I think you've got this perfectly right. I think we should be including YMCA. We're not negotiating for them or on their behalf, but to include them in the conversation. They may have a totally different view of the existing structures and property that the golf course has right now. Maybe they could easily take it over and convert it, use some of it without demolishing it all. You know, that's what private entities do. They've got the capacity to see what their needs would be. So I think including them in the conversation is a good thing. So I do want to move this forward. I do want to get the public conversation started, as the chair said. But I heard a lot of vague answers in Council Olson's discussion about this railroad right away. You know, yeah, you can have a trail near a railroad and they can coexist, but that's not what I heard. What I heard was converting the rail line to a trail. That's something totally different. And I want to know ground truth of that, because we're getting that from constituents that money's been spent. And quite frankly, I think the council as it exists today should set that as a policy decision, you know, and I want to emphatically state, I think between the state's laws that are enabling us to develop that right of way and our own economic development goals, if there is a plan to rip up the rail and put a trail instead, I want that to stop and to kill it off right now. If it is to, in particular locations, perhaps co-locate a trail somewhere nearby the right of way, I have nothing against that as long as it can be safely done. So anyway, what is ground truth on that? Are you ripping up the rails? Is that what you are claiming is the ongoing plan?
Councilors, this is Kevin Tyler. I think I can answer that question. The Chilachi rail with trail plan is what we have. So it's not a plan to convert the railroad to a trail. It's a plan, and it's called the Chilachi rail with trail plan. So if you look at the existing segment of trail near Battleground Lake State Park, it's adjacent to the railroad. And it's my knowledge that that's how the plan is written. And in many locations, it's not exactly alongside the trail where it would be proposed. But if you would all like to see a copy of that plan, I'm sure I can dig it up and send it to you.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that we do need to see the plan again. I've always heard it referred to as rails to trails. And that is indicative of what I believe, and we saw a proposal from Conservation Futures in like 2017 or 18 that was purchasing a piece of property where the Chilachi Railroad went to convert that to a trail. And the owners did not want to sell and did not sell to Conservation Futures. But that is exactly what they said. So it'd be interesting to see the plan, because I've always heard it referred to as rails to trails, i.e., meaning eliminate the railroad, especially north of Battleground, and put a trail there. So a plan would be good, Kevin.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, may I just, I want to segue off of that, because I had conversations with the Brush Prairie Neighborhood Association and some of the people that are part of it. They absolutely claim that realtors told them that their development was going to be connected to the trail, that was going to be the railroad, and the railroad was going to cease to operate. So that, if that's the rumor that's out there, you know, we need to clarify this conversation with the public in this outreach. So there is an absolute belief out there, and some property owners bought their property believing that the railroad was going to cease to operate and it was going to become a trail. They claimed that sidewalks were built to that location specifically for that purpose. So I think we need some transparency here.
Council, if you would like, we could bring it back as a workshop or during a council session to go over the whole plan or what we have adopted. I think that was, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, that this was done many years ago. So we like to just bring that plan and just go over with you. And then if you have additional direction or changes we'd like, we can explore that. So by that way, we can present the whole plan for you.
I think that's
good.
very important to do. And I was wondering, with regard to your comment that the owner would like to have a particular alternative so that he could develop around the railroad, what was intended? What type of development might he be thinking of there?
Again, this is in very preliminary stages, but I think he's looking primarily at residential development. On that stretch next to the railroad, and I think also down in the maintenance area. Again, this is very preliminary, that he is working with his engineers to develop concepts for potential development, but we thought it was important to let council know where the landowner is on this at this point in time.
Well, I might have some concerns about residential being in that particular location, but I also had a question. Alternative 4 was indicated to be the cheapest option, but in looking at the cost for option 3 and 4, they appear to be the same. What makes for the differential there to make 4 be considered the cheapest?
We don't, it's very hard for us to evaluate what the value of water rights are. Without the water rights, the property should be less valuable, but we just don't have a good number of what that value would be. And you know, from a staff perspective, we think water rights are important to hold on to if we're able to do that.
Yeah, I see. And so there's nothing taken out there at all for the water rights, and that's why the numbers appear to be
that is why it would be, yeah, the numbers look similar. We believe identical. It would be the cheapest option. Yeah, identical. Again, it's we're not experts in water rights acquisition, and so we don't have a good sense of what their value would be. I think we'd have a better sense in an agricultural situation, but this is not an agricultural situation.
Well, and just to make it clear, I would like the chair to know that I am a third vote for making sure, positive, that the community is not thinking that there is interest by the council in converting the railroad in any fashion in this area or any place else.
Madam Chair. Just one last. So for those who are listening to the work session, and while we were chatting here, I did pull up on our website the Chilachi Prairie Railwith Trail project, and it does say working to build a multi-use trail paralleling the 33-mile length of the county-owned railroad. So it would be good for everyone to get an update on what that plan really is, and I think we should all look forward to that. But for those who are listening, there's some pretty good information on our website as well. So just for additional information.
And one follow-on point, Madam Chair, it was raised earlier too. Although all citizens are contributing to this conservation fund, I think it is valuable, Ahmad, to have that conversation on some of these options with Battleground as a municipality that has a newfound interest in parks development and planning. That, you know, so for instance, that spur or trail, that long thin piece that's one either to be excluded or included depending on the option. Maybe that's something that the Battleground wants to invest in, to have a trail that's parallel to the railroad. I agree with Karen Bowerman. Putting more houses in there would just add to the confusion of whether or not the railroad's going to grow or be eliminated. And it just, you know, putting residential homes adjacent to a railroad, it just increases the noise level of people complaining about the railroad. So a trail there instead on the far side of the easement would be a great idea to create that buffer that I was mentioning. And maybe Battleground as a municipality is interested in contributing into that.
Thank you, Council, for that point. But City Battleground would be one of my first outreach to them and start having a conversation about what are the options available for them and what they can contribute. So that would be my first one outreach.
Okay, other questions?
I have a question.
Councilor Lentz.
Yeah. For funding, I understand about conservation futures and clean water funding being good sources for the majority of these alternatives and these purchases. Can you refresh our memory? Do we have this funding available currently in these funds?
Yes, the funding is currently available in the funds.
Excellent. And for the other, for the option where we would look at purchasing more, including the clubhouse that may not qualify for those funds, would it be general fund that that remainder would have to come out of, or is there another potential funding source?
I would defer to the budget office on that one, where the funds would be available, and actually it's going to be the council's decision. We know general fund is not the most robust fund these days, and
That's my question. Yeah.
whether you could use REIT funds, which probably aren't that robust these days either, is another question. But that's a council decision guided by the budget office, really.
And just one more question that I believe you have answered in prior work sessions and conversations. But as far as maintenance costs on this, you know, you have a note that having less of the property would mean probably less, you know, it would be cheaper to maintain because there's less of it. What are we looking at in terms of ongoing maintenance costs for any of these purchases?
I don't think we've developed that yet, but we certainly can develop it as we move forward with the outreach on what we estimate maintenance costs. We'd probably take a look at analogous situations like what the Salmon Creek Greenway down in Philida, Lakeview area, Lakeshore area would be running us, and share that information with you.
Thank you. I think that would be good to have as we move forward. I mean, it's certainly, I wouldn't expect that it would be as much as, you know, our developed parks, but it would be good for the council to know that moving forward as far as what ongoing costs would be.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lentz. That, you know, it is really a good point about maintenance costs. You know, the initial cost is always one thing, and developing and then maintaining is a totally different thing. So you know, we really need the full spectrum before we make the decision, you know, to acquire something. And then, and I'm assuming that is part of what you are going to do. I'm not saying you aren't going to, but we really need that knowledge before any real decision is made, and where these maintenance funds are going to come from as well. So, very good point.
Madam Chair.
Councilor.
Yep. Sorry, I think, and maybe Kevin or Pat, you guys can confirm this. I think recently the legislature changed I think it was 10%, but now up to 25% of a project of conservation futures we can use for maintenance. So that those maintenance funds can come from the conservation futures fund. Did I get that right, or did I misremember that?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, well, you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, the Conservation Futures Fund, you can use 25% of the prior year's levy. So whatever we collected in 2020, we can use up to 25% of that in 2021 to take care of maintenance functions.
So it'd be good to see what that potential cost would be and what funds would be available given this new project plus existing projects that we're already maintaining.
We can do that.
Madam Chair, to also follow up on this discussion, this is all great discussion, good points. previous presentations, I've seen funding as including grants, whether it's recreation, conservation, state. I did not at all understand that this entire purchase price was going to come out of clean water and conservation futures. That there was a portion already pinned to state grants or other grants available to add to this. At least that's what I saw at Parks and Rec's presentation. And that also would bear on whether, you know, I don't want to buy an old clubhouse that we're going to have to demolish, but there may be recreation conservation funds available for that purpose, aside from conservation futures and clean water money. So I think a full funding package needs to mature as well.
We do not have any grants secured at this point for this acquisition. We don't know, until council makes a decision whether we pursue it or not. We would not be in a position to apply for grants. But we do believe if we were to acquire the site, there would be opportunities to bring in grant funds to help with the purchase, or at least to reimburse us for any money that we might have outlaid for the purchase in advance of that grant schedule.
Yeah, and I understand that. What I was saying is that presentations to the public included grant funding together with the conservation funding. So yeah, I understand you haven't secured it yet, but it sounds like you've already been planning on a comprehensive packaging for funding this. So that needs to mature.
Okay.
And indeed, I would have the question about what sorts of grants are you talking about? And of course, I do understand. Of course, you haven't applied. You can't apply for something that's non-existent. So, but if you're saying that there are possibility for grants, can you give us an idea of where these grants would come from? What sorts of purposes are these grants used for in the past or whatever? And what sort of, how much are we talking? Possibility and understanding this is, you're kind of shooting in the dark in some ways, but you must have an idea. If it's been in the presentation for the parks, you must know some sources. So if you could illuminate us
Sure.
on those sources.
Yeah. There would be really a variety of sources, number of grant programs through the the State Recreation and Conservation Office. You would have 3 or 4 options within the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program. I think it would be also eligible for some DEQ, clean water sites for things that might help to address temperature and other limitations in Salmon Creek. RCO grants, typically you can max those out at $1 million. If it comes to any subsequent development that may be needed, that there still are RCO grants available. They often max out at $500,000 in terms of what you can apply for. But these would be largely Recreation and Conservation Office, state office that oversees many grant programs throughout the state.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the council?
So I have another question for Ahmad and Kevin and Pat, but to just come back to what you're looking for from us today and to get clarity on that so we can hopefully give you some clarity. Ahmad, could you walk quickly again through what you see as what the guidance is that you need from the council today and the steps that you would take moving forward after you have the guidance that you're seeking?
Thank you, Council, for that. Yes, we'd like to see if the council want us to share all the options available at public outreach. That would be the first thing we like to do, and go out to the public and present these, the city of Battleground, and also notify the neighborhoods around that area, and also in general, either through open houses or just through input from through our website, and then come back to council and then share the findings we have from the public input, either for all the alternatives or one of the alternatives that council, let's say council decides to go with alternative number one, see what the input would be. Or we present them all the alternatives and then we get a tally of all the preference or not preference to council, so then you can make a decision based on what the public input is. And then after that, we will start negotiation with the property owner. So that way we said, this is the alternative we're gonna go with, and then come back after the negotiation is done.
That answer your question, Councilor Lenz?
It did. And so to sort of to come back to the very beginning of that. So Ahmad, would it be safe to say then that you're saying you'd like us to say whether, you know, take all of these forward or pick and choose a few to help narrow down the public outreach part? So if there's things that the council isn't interested in, they don't necessarily need to go to public process.
That's correct. So, yeah, that will help us to narrow down. And we're open to all 5 options, take it to public process and public outreach, or if the council chooses 1 or 2 or just 1. But just like to get some direction on that way, so that way we can take it to public and get the input and support back to you.
Thank you.
So when you put this out publicly, well, of course, this is public right now. We're having a work session. This recording is available, and people can download this information. So all of the cost information is included. I'm assuming that whatever option we choose, we're going to get a professional appraisal before we purchase, but we've sort of already stated, you know, what we're going to, what's out there as far as funds. I guess there is a range, so that helps that there's a range, but there's also a minimum. So anyway, to me, talking about it, anyway, I'll just keep it to myself here. But that sounds, so if the council would like to sort of voice their opinion on what options that we would like to have as far as the public input that is up and coming, I would entertain some ideas on that at this point, please.
Madam Chair, I don't know if others are interested in a tally from the public on each of the 5 options, but I know that I'm not, because I'm interested in a broader look at property utilization from the public's perspective, and especially from Battleground's perspective relative to their own city. So my personal choice would be to go with alternative 1 as the option that we put out there to the public, but not coming as a commitment from the council at this time that we will go forward with option 1, because after all, there are a lot of questions that we've raised that we've said need to be answered first.
Thank you, Councillor. I would agree. We do not want this to be stated that this is this idea of placing before the public all of the options. I agree, is not a good idea. And if we can narrow it down, I too actually think that option 1 is the best option that we should be proposing to the public and have input from them with regard to this. So yeah, you might give us option one there. So that would be my preference. Other comments from the council, please.
So I just want to clarify what was just stated. So you really don't want to give options. You just want to, for public comment, put up option one. Is that correct?
That's what I was thinking, yes. And not that we would, and that way, what we're getting back from the public is not a vote by option or a tally, this many for option one, this many for option three. That is not something that would be of interest to me as a counselor. So what I would like to understand from the public and especially from Battleground is a much broader picture of land utilization and their vision for this being owned by the county.
Okay, and what's on the screen right now is option one. Is that correct, Ahmad?
That's
Okay.
correct, Councilor. It's option
Thank you.
one, yeah.
Okay, yes, when they scrolled down, it came up.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm favorable to putting option one forward. I also think perhaps since we've heard from the seller that they're interested in something that looks more like alternative three, perhaps putting that out as well. I'd be interested in hearing the public's input on the difference and what they would see as, you know, the public value of the parts of the property that we're talking about that are different. So I'd be interested in seeing that out there as well. I think for the final option, with including the clubhouse, we know we probably can't even afford it. So I'd hate to even really engage in a lot of that conversation since we know we probably can't go there. I think we should keep the water rights in any part of the conversation. And the difference between 1, 2, and 3 is marginal. So perhaps offering out 1 and 3 would help show potential differences and help us get some input on that decision there.
And so, Madam Chair, I don't know what was heard and what wasn't heard. At some point, I became muted during my my thought process. But if you're focusing just on providing alternative one to the public, I would agree with that. I think giving too many options to the public would be too confusing. And I think, as Councilor Lynch just said, you know, I want to keep the water rights in. I want to exclude the existing clubhouse. And I think alternative one is what we would tee up for the public if we are to only provide them. Basically, here's what we're thinking. What's your input?
Do you think that you would like to offer more than that?
I'm first perfectly satisfied going with alternative one. I mean, it's not going to be set in stone. If we hear from the public that they want more or less, we can always go to tee up other alternatives at that point.
Okay, thank you. Councilor,
Are you asking for my feedback or input?
yes, please.
So yeah, I mean, I think I would lean toward putting out 1 and 3. I'm fine putting out just 1. So I think it sounds like you already have sort of an agreement on putting out just 1. So, but to get feedback on a couple different options, I think is reasonable. But if you just put out 1, that's fine too.
Would you mind putting up alternative 3 again so that we can see that? What it includes. Thank you. Yeah. The property, this including property by the railroad, is a little sketchy to me, although I would say it's real possible that once the public sees this, they would also say, they don't want the development. And so, anyway. I guess I'm not adverse to allowing for 3 alternatives, but I actually think that alternative 1 is really the best for the county to consider and get input from. If we give too many choices in many, I mean, anyway, I think just allowing the option 1 is probably the better course to take. This would be probably, including option 3 might be helpful to the seller because he may learn from they may learn from what the public says about that part of it. But I think what we should start with really is option 1 and see what we hear from the public on that and battleground.
And so I was ambivalent on including 3 as well until you've just had this discussion and also looking at, it's really an extension of Salmon Morgan Creek's preserve, which I really like. And I really like having an open space and buffer, possibility of a trail with no additional houses right along the railroad. So I'm not so ambivalent anymore. I would like to just tee up alternate 1.
Okay, looks like you have your direction, Ahmad. Is that what you need for now?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. We will do is we'll start our public outreach. My first conversation will be with City of Battleground. The question that was posed by council, and we'll talk, and then also put it out through our social media, our website, and then also if we can do open house, that we can collect the data and then bring back to council as soon as we can.
The one thing, Ahmad, that is really, really important to me, at least, and probably to Councilor Medvedev, because this is his district, is that the individuals who live in the Cedars have real preference to have some input here, because they have a great investment in their homes there, and they really need to have the opportunity to speak to it. So please make an extra effort, a specific effort to the Cedars, those that live within the Cedars golf course area, so that they know this is going on. And when you have an open house, maybe use the clubhouse as the place to hold the open house. The owner probably would allow that. So that would be my suggestion. But I would say definitely aside from the place that it's held, the people that live in the Cedars must have an extra mailing or something. They need to have a letter from us, not just a Facebook or a website thing. They need a notice from us that we're going to have this open house. So
a great point, Chair. I think that, like when we do a notification to public, if there's a development, we'll do the same procedure so the neighboring properties understand that, and then when we have open house, or direct them where they can send us their comments.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Is there anything else that the council have comments or anything for the good of the order here? I don't see anything. Thank you so much, all of you, Kevin, Patrick, and Ahmad, for your presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, council, for your time.
Thank you. Okay, do we want to take a 5-minute break?